The anchor and chain wasn't much to look at from the outside. It sat on the edge of Coronado, California, just a few blocks from the Naval Amphibious Base. The paint on the wooden sign had faded years ago, and the parking lot was more gravel than asphalt. But for the men and women who served at the base, it was sacred ground. A place where uniforms came off and stories got told. Sarah Martinez had owned the bar for 3 years now. She stood behind the counter most nights, pouring drinks and listening to the same tales of glory that these sailors and SEALs loved to tell. She was 34 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to carry more weight than her small frame should hold. Most of the regulars knew her simply as Sarah. She smiled when she needed to, kept the beer cold and the whiskey flowing. She didn't talk much about herself. In a place like this, the bartender was supposed to listen, not share. It was a Thursday night when Lieutenant Jake Morrison walked in with his team. 4 Navy SEALs, fresh from a training exercise, still riding high on adrenaline and brotherhood. They took their usual table near the back, loud and full of life the way young warriors often are. Sarah had seen Morrison before. He was the type who thought his uniform gave him permission to own every room he entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that tipped over into arrogance. His teammates followed his lead, laughing at his jokes even when they weren't funny. "Sarah," Morrison called out, snapping his fingers like she was a waitress at a diner. "Round of beers for the heroes." She bit back the response that wanted to come out. Instead, she pulled 5 cold bottles from the cooler and carried them to the table. The men barely acknowledged her as she set them down. "You know," Morrison said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been coming here for 6 months, and I still don't know your story, Sarah. You got a call sign. Every military bar's got a bartender with some kind of past." The other SEALs chuckled. One of them, a younger guy named Peters, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. "No call sign," Sarah said quietly. "Just Sarah." "Come on," Morrison pressed, taking a long drink from his bottle. "Everyone's got something. What you do before this? Serve coffee on a base somewhere. File paperwork." "I just serve drinks," Sarah replied, her voice steady but her jaw tight. Morrison exchanged glances with his teammates, a smirk spreading across his face. "You hear that, boys? Just serves drinks. No story, no glory, just another civilian making money off real warriors." Sarah turned to walk away, but Morrison wasn't done. Wait," he said, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "I bet she's got a call sign, something like barmaid or beer girl. What do you think, guys?" The laughter from his table cut through the low hum of conversation in the bar. A few other patrons glanced over, some looking away quickly, others watching with interest. Sarah stopped walking. Her hand gripped the empty serving tray so hard her knuckles went white. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, her back to Morrison's table. Then she continued to the bar without saying a word. An older man sitting at the counter, a retired Marine named Frank who'd been coming to the Anchor and Chain since before Sarah owned it, shook his head slowly. "That boy doesn't know when to shut his mouth," he muttered. Sarah set the tray down and began wiping glasses, her movements mechanical and precise. She'd learned a long time ago how to push feelings down deep where they couldn't hurt her. How to keep moving forward even when everything inside screamed to fight back. Morrison's table got louder as the night went on. More beers, more stories, more ego filling up the space like smoke. Other patrons started leaving earlier than usual. The energy in the bar had shifted, become uncomfortable. Around 10 o'clock, a man Sarah didn't recognize came through the door. He was older, maybe late 50s, with gray hair cut military short and the bearing of someone who'd seen real combat. He wore jeans and a simple black shirt, but something about the way he carried himself made everyone take notice. He walked straight to the bar and took a seat on the stool in front of Sarah. "Whiskey," he said. "Neat." Sarah poured the drink and slid it across the bar. The man studied her face for a long moment, his eyes sharp and calculating. "I know you," he said quietly. Sarah met his gaze, but said nothing. From the back of the bar, Morrison's voice rang out again. Hey, Sarah, another round, and maybe you can tell my friend here, he gestured to Peters, about all your combat experience pouring beer. The laughter that followed was harsh and mean. The older man at the bar didn't laugh. Instead, he turned slowly on his stool to look at Morrison's table. When he turned back to Sarah, there was something almost like sadness in his eyes. They don't know, do they? He asked. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she picked up a glass to clean. Don't know what? The older man's words hung in the air between them. Sarah's heart began to beat faster, but her face remained calm. She'd spent years perfecting that mask. You've got me confused with someone else, she said, her voice low and controlled. The man took a sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. Battle Saint, that's what they called you, wasn't it? Sarah's hand froze mid-motion. The glass she was holding nearly slipped from her fingers. No one had called her that name in 3 years, not since the day she'd walked away from everything she'd ever known. I think you should drink your whiskey and mind your business, she said, but her voice had lost its steadiness. The man nodded slowly. Fair enough, but those boys back there, he gestured toward Morrison's table with his glass, they're making a mistake, a big one. Before Sarah could respond, Morrison's voice cut through the bar again. Sarah, you fall asleep up there. We're dying of thirst. Frank, the retired Marine, had been watching the exchange between Sarah and the older man. Now he stood up from his stool, his face red with anger. Why don't you boys show some respect? He called out to Morrison's table. Morrison turned, his smile dangerous. Why don't you mind your own business, old man? This is between us and the help. The help, Frank took a step forward. You arrogant little. Frank, it's okay, Sarah said quickly, moving from behind the bar. Really, I've got this. She grabbed 5 more beers and carried them to Morrison's table. As she set them down, Morrison reached out and grabbed her wrist. You know what I think, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I think you're intimidated by real soldiers. That's why you're so quiet. You know you could never handle what we do. Sarah looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. Her expression was unreadable. Let go of me, she said quietly. Or what? Morrison challenged, his grip tightening slightly. You gonna throw me out, you and what army? The bar had gone completely silent. Even Morrison's teammates looked uncomfortable now. Peters started to say something, but Morrison shot him a warning look. The older man at the bar stood up slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Son, you're going to want to let go of her, right now. Morrison laughed, but there was uncertainty in it now. And who the hell are you? Someone who knows exactly who she is. The man walked slowly toward the table. And if you had any sense, you'd apologize and walk out of here while you still have your dignity intact. Morrison released Sarah's wrist but stood up to face the older man. At his full height, Morrison was taller and younger, his body honed by years of SEAL training. You threatening me? Stating facts, the man replied calmly. You see, I was at Kandahar in 2019. Provincial Route 611, about 40 clicks north of the city. You heard of it. Something flickered across Morrison's face. Everyone's heard of PR 611. Then you know what happened there, the older man continued. Convoy ambush, 30 Taliban fighters, 5 American vehicles, 22 soldiers, complete kill zone, coordinated attack, should have been a massacre. The bar was so quiet now that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. She stood perfectly still, her arms at her sides, her face pale. What's your point? Morrison asked, but his voice had lost its edge. My point is that convoy had a medic. A combat medic who was supposed to stay back, stay safe, treat the wounded after the shooting stopped. But when the ambush happened, when the bullets started flying and men started dying, that medic did something incredible. The older man turned to look at Sarah. Several other patrons in the bar had stopped pretending not to listen. They were all watching now. That medic grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier and held off an entire enemy position for 40 minutes. Alone. Gave the rest of the convoy time to regroup and call for air support. Took 3 bullets doing it. Saved 16 lives that day. Peters, the younger SEAL, stood up slowly from the table. His face had gone white. "Oh my God," he whispered. "The Battle Saint, that was you." Morrison turned to stare at Sarah, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been fear. Sarah said nothing. She just stood there, her dark eyes fixed on some point beyond all of them, seeing something none of them could see. "The military wanted to give her a silver star," the older man continued. "She refused it, said she was just doing her job, but the men she saved that day, we gave her a different kind of recognition. We called her the Battle Saint, because she fought like an angel and saved souls like one too." "That's impossible," Morrison said, but his voice was weak. "I would have heard, someone would have told us." "She left the service 3 years ago," the older man said. "Medical discharge after her 3rd combat tour. The physical wounds healed. The other ones—" He looked at Sarah with something like understanding. "Those take longer." Frank, the retired Marine at the bar, was smiling now. "I knew it," he said softly. "I knew there was something about you, Sarah. I could see it in the way you moved, the way you carried yourself." Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was a different person, a different life." The silence in the anchor and chain felt like a physical presence. Morrison stood frozen, his beer forgotten in his hand. His teammates had gone quiet, their earlier bravado evaporated like morning fog. Sarah turned away from the table and walked back to the bar. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she was carrying something heavy that no one else could see. She picked up the bottle of whiskey and poured herself a glass, something she never did while working. "Sarah, Morrison started, but she held up one hand without looking at him. "Don't," she said. The word wasn't angry or bitter, it was just tired. "Just don't." The older man returned to his seat at the bar. He pulled out his wallet and set a business card on the counter. "My name is Colonel James Hartley, retired. I was the convoy commander that day on PR 611. I owe you my life and the lives of my men." Sarah stared at the card but didn't touch it. "You don't owe me anything, Colonel. I was doing my job." "That's what you said then, too," Hartley replied with a sad smile. "But what you did went so far beyond duty that we didn't have words for it. Still don't." Morrison had finally found his voice again. He approached the bar slowly, like someone approaching a dangerous animal. "I need to apologize. I was way out of line. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Sarah interrupted, finally looking at him. "You saw a woman behind a bar and made assumptions. You thought service meant one thing, your thing, and anything else didn't count." "You're right," Morrison said, and to his credit, he looked genuinely ashamed. "I was an arrogant jerk, no excuse for it." Peters had joined his team leader at the bar. "Ma'am, I read about PR 611 in training. They taught it as an example of battlefield initiative and courage under fire. But they never mentioned names, just called it the Battle Saint incident." Sarah took a drink of her whiskey, the amber liquid burning down her throat. "The Army kept my name out of official reports at my request. I didn't want the attention. Didn't want to become some poster girl for female soldiers in combat. I just wanted to do my job and go home." "But you couldn't go home, could you?" Hartley said quietly. "Because after what you'd seen, what you'd done, home didn't exist anymore." Sarah's hands tightened around her glass. "That's not—" "It's exactly what happened," Hartley said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've been where you are, Sarah. After my 4th tour, I came back and realized I didn't fit anywhere anymore. The civilian world felt wrong, shallow, like everyone was playing at life while I'd seen what life really cost." Frank spoke up from his stool. "That why you opened this bar, to stay connected to the service without being in it?" Sarah nodded slowly. "After the medical discharge, I didn't know what to do with myself. Couldn't handle a normal job. Couldn't handle people who'd never been there asking me what it was like. This place." She looked around the worn wooden bar, the faded photographs of ships and sailors on the walls. "This place made sense. These people understand." "Except when they don't," Morrison said bitterly. "God, I feel like such an idiot." "You should," Sarah replied, but there was no venom in it. "But you're also young. You think you know what courage looks like because you've trained for it, prepared for it. You haven't learned yet that real courage isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about what you do when everything falls apart and you're the only thing standing between life and death. The bar door opened, and several more people came in, regular patrons who knew Sarah, who'd been coming to the Anchor and Chain for years. They sensed immediately that something had happened. The energy in the room was different, charged with emotion. A woman in her 50s named Carol, whose son had served in the Marines, approached the bar. "Sarah, you okay, honey?" Sarah managed a smile. "I'm fine, Carol, just dealing with some old memories." But Hartley shook his head. "She's not fine. None of us who have been through that are fine, but she's strong, stronger than any soldier I've ever known." Word spread through the bar like wildfire. Quiet conversations, whispered explanations. Within minutes, everyone in the Anchor and Chain knew the truth about their bartender. The woman who'd been serving them drinks and listening to their stories for 3 years was a decorated combat veteran, a hero who'd never told her story. Morrison's teammates had gathered around him, speaking in low voices. Finally, they all approached the bar together. Peters spoke for the group. "Ma'am, we'd like to buy a round for the house, in your honor, if that's okay." Sarah looked at the young faces in front of her, boys really, playing at being men, just like she'd once been a girl playing at being a soldier. Until the day the playing stopped and reality came crashing in. "You don't need to do that," she said. "Yes, we do," Morrison insisted. "And not just because of what you did in Afghanistan. Because of what you've been doing here every day for 3 years. Serving us, listening to us, taking our garbage, and never once making us feel small for not knowing who you really were." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't painful exactly, more like something that had been locked up tight suddenly opening. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." As she began pulling beers and pouring shots for everyone in the bar, Sarah felt Hartley's eyes on her. She glanced at him, and he smiled, not a happy smile, but an understanding one. "You can't hide forever, you know," he said softly. "Not from this, not from who you are." "I'm not hiding," Sarah replied. "I'm just trying to move forward." "Are you?" Hartley asked. "Or are you standing still, serving drinks and watching other people live their lives while yours is frozen in that moment on PR 611? Sarah didn't answer Hartley's question. She couldn't, because she knew he was right. For 3 years, she'd been going through the motions of living without actually being alive. The bar had been her shelter, her hiding place, her way of staying close to the military world without having to be part of it anymore. The atmosphere in the Anchor and Chain had shifted completely. What had started as a humiliating confrontation had transformed into something else entirely. Patrons who'd known Sarah for years approached her with new respect in their eyes. Some thanked her for her service. Others just nodded, understanding passing between veterans without words. Morrison and his team stayed at the bar, nursing their drinks in subdued silence. The arrogance that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by something that looked like shame mixed with awe. Around midnight, as the crowd began to thin, Carol pulled Sarah aside near the back hallway. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice serious. "My son Tommy is coming home next month, from Iraq, and he's not okay." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "He won't talk about what happened over there, won't see a counselor, won't even tell me how he's feeling. He just says he's fine, but I know he's not." Carol's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to help him." "But maybe you do." Sarah wanted to say no, wanted to tell Carol that she was the last person who should be helping anyone else, that she could barely help herself. But looking at this mother's desperate face, she couldn't do it. "Have him come see me when he gets back," Sarah said quietly. "I can't promise anything, but I'll talk to him." Carol hugged her tightly. Thank you so much." After Carol left, Sarah found herself alone at the bar with just Hartley and Frank remaining. Morrison and his team had slipped out quietly about 20 minutes earlier, leaving a note with a substantial tip and another apology. "You're going to have to make a choice," Hartley said, breaking the comfortable silence. You can keep running this bar, keep hiding behind this counter, keep telling yourself that this is enough. Or you can step back into the world and use what you learned, what you survived to help others. I'm not qualified to help anyone, Sarah protested. I'm barely holding myself together. That's exactly what makes you qualified, Frank interjected. You know what it's like. You've been in the darkness. You can guide others through it. Sarah shook her head. I don't even know how to guide myself through it. Hartley leaned forward. After I retired, I started a program. It's called the Warrior's Path. We work with combat veterans who are struggling with the transition back to civilian life. We don't do therapy. There are professionals for that. But we provide mentorship, community, and practical support from people who have been exactly where they are. He pulled out another card and set it next to the first one on the bar. We need people like you, Sarah. People who have seen the worst and survived it. People who understand that courage isn't about never being afraid or never being broken. It's about what you do after you're broken, how you put the pieces back together. I don't know if I can, Sarah whispered. Some days I can barely get out of bed. Some nights I still wake up hearing the sounds of that ambush, smelling the gunpowder and blood, seeing the faces of the men I couldn't save. How many did you lose that day? Hartley asked gently. 6, Sarah replied. The number burned into her memory. 6 men died before the air support arrived. I see their faces every day. And how many lived because of you? Frank asked. 16, but... No buts, Hartley said firmly. 16 men went home to their families because you refused to give up. 16 mothers got their sons back. 16 wives got their husbands back. 16 sets of children got their fathers back. That's who you are, Sarah. That's what you did. Sarah felt the tears she'd been holding back finally break through. They ran down her cheeks silently as years of suppressed emotion poured out. I'm so tired, she sobbed. I'm so tired of carrying this. Hartley came around the bar and pulled her into a hug, not romantic, not awkward, just the embrace of one soldier understanding another soldier's pain. Then let us help you carry it. That's what we do. That's what warriors do for each other. Frank joined them, his weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. You've been serving others long enough, girl. Time to let others serve you. They stood there in the empty bar, 3 veterans of different wars and different eras, united by the common experience of sacrifice and survival. Outside, Coronado slept peacefully, protected by people like them who bore burdens that civilians would never understand. Eventually, Sarah pulled back and wiped her eyes. What would I even do in this program of yours? Talk to veterans who are struggling, Hartley explained. Share your story. Let them see that someone who went through hell can come out the other side and build a life. You wouldn't be a therapist or a counselor, just someone who's been there, someone who understands. I still own this bar, Sarah said, looking around at the place that had been her refuge. I can't just abandon it. Hire a manager, Frank suggested. Or sell it, or keep running it part-time. But don't use it as an excuse to keep hiding. You're worth more than that. Sarah thought about Carol's son Tommy, coming home broken from Iraq. She thought about the thousands of other young men and women returning from war zones around the world, carrying invisible wounds that no one else could see. She thought about the 6 men who'd died on PR 611 and the 16 who'd lived. Okay, she said finally. Okay, I'll do it, but I need help. I can't do this alone. Hartley smiled, a real smile this time, full of warmth and hope. You're not alone. You've never been alone. You just forgot that for a while. 3 months later, Sarah stood in front of a room full of veterans at the Warrior's Path Community Center in San Diego. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. It was the first time she'd told her full story to a group, not just the Battle Saint incident, but everything that had come after. The nightmares, the isolation, the feeling of being lost in a world that no longer made sense. The room was silent as she spoke. 20 faces watched her, men and women of different ages, different branches, different wars. But all of them wore the same expression, recognition. They saw themselves in her story. Carol's son, Tommy, sat in the front row. He'd been meeting with Sarah once a week for the past 2 months, slowly opening up about his experiences in Iraq. The anger and isolation he'd been feeling had begun to ease as he realized he wasn't alone in his struggle. When Sarah finished speaking, a woman in her 30s stood up. "How do you deal with the guilt?" she asked, her voice breaking. "The guilt of surviving when others didn't." Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't think you ever completely deal with it," she said honestly. "But I've learned that the best way to honor the ones we lost is to live fully, not half alive, not hiding, but really living. They don't get that chance. We do, and wasting it dishonors their sacrifice." A older veteran in the back raised his hand. "Do the nightmares ever stop?" "Sometimes they get better," Sarah replied. "Sometimes they get worse, but I've learned that fighting them only makes them stronger. The trick is to acknowledge them, to let yourself feel the pain and the fear, and then to remind yourself that you survived. You're here, you're alive, and that matters." After the session ended, people lined up to talk to Sarah individually. She listened to their stories, offered what advice she could, and mostly just provided a presence. Someone who understood, who'd been there, who wouldn't judge them for their struggles. Hartley watched from the back of the room, proud of how far Sarah had come. She'd been working with the Warrior's Path for 3 months now, and she'd already helped dozens of veterans find their footing again. More importantly, helping them had helped her find her own path forward. The anchor and chain was still open, but Sarah had hired a manager to run it during the week. She still worked behind the bar on weekends, still poured drinks and listened to stories. But it was no longer her hiding place. It was just one part of her life now, not the whole thing. That evening, as Sarah was packing up to leave the community center, Morrison walked through the door. He was in civilian clothes, looking uncertain and uncomfortable. "Lieutenant Morrison," Sarah said in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Jake," he corrected. "Just Jake, I'm not in uniform." He shifted his weight awkwardly. "I heard about this program, about what you've been doing here, and I wanted to talk to you about something." They sat down in the now empty room. Morrison, Jake looked down at his hands as he spoke. "That night at the bar, when I was such a jerk to you, that wasn't just arrogance, it was fear." "Fear?" Sarah asked. "I've been a SEAL for 6 years," he explained. "Done 3 tours, and the truth is I'm scared all the time. Scared I'm not good enough. Scared I'll let my team down. Scared that one day I'll freeze up when it matters most. So I act tough, talk big, make myself seem invincible. Because if I can convince everyone else, maybe I can convince myself." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's a heavy mask to wear." "It is," Jake agreed. "And that night, seeing you, someone who'd actually been tested in ways I can't even imagine, someone who'd proven their courage beyond any doubt, and you were just quietly serving drinks, not bragging, not posturing. It made me realize how empty all my performance was." "You're being too hard on yourself," Sarah said. "You're a good soldier, Jake. Your team respects you." "But do they know me?" he asked. "Do they know that I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, convinced that I'm going to get them all killed? Do they know that I'm terrified of the day when my training won't be enough and someone will die because I made the wrong call?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Every leader carries that fear," she finally said. "I carried it every day as a combat medic, the fear that I wouldn't be fast enough, skilled enough, strong enough to save someone who needed me. And you know what? That fear came true. On PR 611, I lost 6 men. 6 lives I couldn't save, no matter how hard I tried." Jake looked up at her, his eyes red. "How do you live with that?" "I remind myself that I saved 16 others," Sarah replied. "I remind myself that fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you careful. It makes you better. The day you stop being afraid is the day you start making stupid mistakes. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you focused. The trick is not to let it paralyze you." They talked for another hour. Jake opened up about his experiences, his fears, his doubts. Sarah listened and shared her own struggles. By the time he left, something had shifted in his bearing. He stood a little taller, moved with a little less tension. A week later, Sarah received a letter. It was from one of the men who'd survived PR 611, one of the 16 she'd saved. He'd heard that she was working with the Warrior's Path and wanted to thank her, not just for saving his life that day, but for continuing to save lives by helping other veterans find their way. The letter ended with a line that made Sarah cry. "You earned the name Battle Saint that day in Afghanistan, but you're earning it again every day now. Thank you for teaching us that survival isn't enough. We have to learn to live." Sarah pinned the letter to the bulletin board in her small office at the community center. It joined other letters, other thank you notes, other small pieces of evidence that her life had meaning beyond that one terrible, glorious day in 2019. That weekend, she stood behind the bar at the Anchor and Chain again. Frank was in his usual spot, and several veterans from the Warriors Path program had started coming in regularly. The atmosphere was different now, warmer, more connected. It wasn't just a bar anymore. It was a community. Morrison, Jake, came in with his team, but this time he approached the bar with humility instead of arrogance. "Sarah," he said, "I want to introduce you to my guys. The real me, not the fake tough guy version. And I want them to know who you really are too." Sarah smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. "I'd like that." As she poured drinks and listened to the SEALs really talk, openly and honestly, about their fears and challenges, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt useful. She felt connected. She felt alive. Hartley walked in around 9 o'clock and took his usual seat at the bar. Sarah poured him his whiskey without being asked. "You did good work this week," he said. "The testimonials from the veterans you worked with were incredible." "They did the hard work," Sarah replied. "I just walked beside them." "That's all any of us can do," Hartley said. "Walk beside each other through the darkness and remind each other that there's light ahead." Sarah looked around the bar, at Frank, at Jake and his team, at the other veterans scattered throughout the room. She thought about Tommy, who was slowly finding his way back to himself. She thought about the woman who'd asked about guilt, the man who'd asked about nightmares, all the broken people who were learning to be whole again. "Colonel," she said quietly, "thank you. For that night 3 months ago when you told everyone who I was. I thought you were exposing me, dragging me back into something I'd escaped. But you weren't. You were setting me free." Hartley raised his glass. "To freedom," he said, "and to battle saints wherever they may be." Sarah raised her own glass and clinked it against his. "To battle saints," she echoed, "and to finding our way home." Outside, the California night was warm and clear. Inside the Anchor and Chain, warriors gathered to share their burdens, their stories, their struggles and triumphs. And behind the bar, a woman who'd once held off 30 Taliban fighters single-handedly now did something even braver. She let herself be vulnerable, be seen, be human. The name Battle Saint had been given to her for one moment of extraordinary courage. But she earned it every day by showing a different kind of courage. The courage to keep living, to keep helping, to keep believing that broken things could be made whole again. In the end, that was the greatest battle of all. And Sarah Martinez was winning it, one day, one veteran, one life at a time.